Good evening and assalamu alaikum to our listeners and viewers all around South Africa and the world. My name is Dakir Dawood and I'm going to be your host for this evening. I'm going to be taking you through right until 8 o'clock this evening. We've got a jam-packed lineup. First up, we're going to be paying a special tribute towards former SARU President Ebrahim Patel, and we're going to be joined by an esteemed panel that consists of administrators in the game that have taken the baton all the way forward. And joined with us tonight, we're going to have Mark Alexander, the current SARU president. We're going to be having on Derek Jardine as well, who was a Turfu administrator, as well as the former vice president of the Golden Lions Rugby Union. And then we're going to be joined by a former SARU president, Mr. Ebrahim van Rooyen, as well. We're going to be paying tribute to the legend, Ebrahim Patel, a former rugby administrator. Later on in the show, we're going to be chatting a bit more about what's happening in the world of football and our local and current events that's happening in South Africa at the moment. Well, to give you more context around Ebrahim Patel, he was a pioneer of rugby unification in South Africa. He served jointly as the first president of the newly formed SARU with Dr. Dani Craven in 1992. He played an instrumental role in the negotiations with the respective parties that led to the eventual establishment of SARU, paving the way for the Springboks' restoration to international competition and ultimately South Africa's hosting of the transformational Rugby World Cup 1995. Patel also served as a representative of his union on the IRB, which is now the World Rugby Council, between 1992 and 1993, playing an active and committed role in the advancement of rugby at the time of great change and development. Earlier this week, Sir Bill Beaumont, the current World Rugby Chairman, paid his sympathies and respect and highlighted the enormous contribution that Mr. Patel had both to domestic and international rugby. He also said that Ibrahim's role in unifying the sport in South Africa should not be underestimated, and his impact on the global stage as an IRB Council member was equally impactful at a time of great change for the sport. Well, a man of such magnitude, I mean, we can only but sing his praises all night long. But tonight, to give us more of an insight into what it was like working with him and knowing him on a personal basis, we're going to be joined by gentlemen that will be telling us more. First up, we've got the SARU president, Mr. Mark Alexander, that will be chatting to us a bit more about the late Ebrahim Patel. Good evening, Mark. Thank you for joining me on the show this evening. I really appreciate it.
Good evening.
Mark, you've worked with Mr. Patel at Turfu level and higher up as well. Just to give a bit more insight to the viewers and the listeners, his type of character and what type of a person was Mr. Patel?
Mr. Patel was a courageous leader, one of the pioneers of non-racial rugby in the 80s. He was instrumental in the formation of the post-apartheid South African Rugby Union. He served the game at several levels, as a spokesman, as a secretary, as a president. He was a very principled administrator, with strong non-racial values, and he would not compromise on those values. I believe his name will be etched in the rugby history going forward. He was also a brilliant orator. I was very fortunate that in 1980, the deputy president of the Transvaal Independent Rugby Football Union took ill, and Mr. Patel appointed me to serve as his deputy. I was still a player, and I said, Mr. Patel, but I play rugby. I'm a player. I don't have to be here. And he said to me at the time, and he spoke about succession planning in the 80s already. We need to plan for the future. We can't plan with old people. We have to plan with young people. And I owe all the things I know about sports administration to him. He introduced me in the early 80s as I was still a player, and I played provincial rugby then. Until 1990, I served with him. So, he was a great leader. He was a great orator. He was a great debater at the NSC meetings. He really placed rugby in a good place. He was the right man for the right job in early 1992 when we went into unity. It was tough negotiations, and we needed a tough person there at the time. And Mr. Patel was that person. You know, they met with the rugby board in London, in Lusaka, and in Harare. And he pushed a hard game, you know, and we must be grateful for what he did for us and where rugby is today. If it wasn't for people like him, we wouldn't be in the place we are today. So I'm extremely grateful for his contribution to the game and to my career in sports administration.
And you said that your career as a sport administrator started when you were a player and they called you
I was a player, and I thought, why don't you get me involved in sports administration? All I wanted to do is play. I had no ambitions of being an administrator.
And fast forward a couple of years, and you're the president of the South African Rugby Union.
And the funny thing about that, he became the first president of South African Rugby Union. And the second president came from the Transvaal Independent Rugby Football Union was Ebrahim van Rooyen. And from that same union, I became president of the South African Rugby Union. So there was something he did right in that union, that they produced so many administrators that served South African Rugby Union. Neville Jardine is now is president of the Golden Lions. So there was a lot of good that we learned from this pioneer.
Well, you spoke about Mr. van Rooyen, and we've actually got him on the line. Good evening, Mr. van Rooyen. Thank you for joining us this evening on Salam Media.
Hello, Lamir. How are you?
All good, thank you. All good, thank you.
And I believe we've got Derek there as well. Yes, I thank you for having me. You know, I was listening to what Mark was saying earlier on. And the one thing that Mr. Patel instilled in us, I just want to echo this one thing that Mark has raised, was to have good administration. He says if your administration is right, then your organization will be right. You know, I'm in a similar case that Mark has been in. I was a player. I couldn't continue playing because Mr. Patel wanted me as part of the executive. I was the treasurer serving under Mark as the vice president and Mr. Patel. He instilled the discipline of having good administration. And we can see that all over with the administrators that came out of the then Transvaal Independent Rugby Football Union. Mark has just mentioned Neville Jardine. Neville served as the treasurer at Transvaal Independent Rugby Football Union for a time as well. We had top-class administrators, and that is what was inculcated in the SARU philosophy, is to have good administrators, good administration. And then I can mention the names, you know, from the late Dullah Abbas to John Kester to Noor Khan to Mr. Page to, you know, great administrators, Saz Bailey, Lexham Party, that later became the president of the Supreme Court of Appeal. We can mention, there are so many to mention, and you know, for fear of leaving them out, I've mentioned a few of those people, but everybody that came through the hands of Ebrahim Patel would know that there was a mission, and that mission had to be fulfilled.
And you know, just we speaking a bit about his personality and the type of person that he was and type of administration that he led at the time. But now we want to get a bit into detail and give the public a broader view on the role that he actually played in rugby and the importance. And I mean, if I could just go around the room while we wait for Derek and Brian, I want to pose this question to you. The role that he played in the formation of a united rugby union, what was that process like, and how did he successfully pull it off and get unity within all the different rugby unions to come under one banner?
You know, it was a big challenge, and again, Mark sitting there, and both of us have had that experience and looked at how he took full cognizance of the fact that the non-white populace of South Africa were just as passionate supporters of rugby as the white counterparts. Without sacrificing, and I need to make this point because there's been a lot of naysayers that Ebrahim Patel sold out. Without sacrificing his SACOS principles of no normal sport in an abnormal society. He, Ebrahim Patel, with a number of his executives on national level and us at provincial level, exploring the possibility of SARU playing international rugby outside of the auspices of the IRB. You know, given that the IRB, that the rugby board in South Africa could not resolve the problems of the game in the anti-apartheid South African context, it was clear that South Africa had to be united. You know, Patel had this view that if we can't do it with the support of the International Rugby Board, we will have to seek our way through Africa. You know, I know that Ebrahim Patel was a humble man. You know, at times we would have games at the Longdale Stadium, now the Bill Jardine Stadium, and Patel would balance what he had to do from a community perspective. We'll find him on the roof of the Masjid in Bosmont painting the roof. That's the president of SARU, you know. His striving was not aimed at fame or fortune. And the only reward I believe that Ebrahim Patel sought was that the knowledge that all South Africans would be playing and supporting this game. He never wanted to get involved for his own fame and fortune. You know, when I look at the things that I've encountered, Mark will tell you and Derek will tell you that we all encountered with Ebrahim Patel. He was a unifier. He was the man that I remember we were all going to a meeting in Port Elizabeth, and myself and the late Bill Jardine and Marlon and Adams and Mark, and we were all going to this meeting that we now gonna start this process, that we must give in the mandate. You know, Patel was one of those guys that people would come to a meeting and they would want to say, we will not give him the mandate to do this. And then he will come and he will state his case. And after that meeting, he'll get the mandate. You know, Patel throughout the time would go without the security police of the apartheid regime, knows that they're going to Lusaka, that they're going to meet with the ANC. On one instance, I remember so vividly that Louis Lake, the late Louis Lake, also challenged the establishment and says, well, we are going to Lusaka. I don't care what the government is saying. Because it was the only way that South Africa was going to get back into rugby.
Well, and speaking about getting back into rugby, unity was achieved on the 20th of March 1992 in Kimberley following the COVID negotiations between the old South African Rugby Board and the banned ANC from 1998 onwards. Mark, can you give us more insight into some of those negotiations and what took place? And I know that rugby was a sport loved by South Africa at the time. And what was sacrificed in those negotiations in order to see a country united going forward, and now currently world champions, 3-time world champions?
I think before I answer that question, something people forget about Mr. Patel. He was a well-read individual. He was a great orator. We used to listen to speeches where he speaks in English and Afrikaans fluently, off the cuff, quoting from the Quran and the Bible. I had to go check those Bible verses to make sure that he's quoting the right. But he was well read, so he could speak at any forum. Any forum he could speak. So going into the negotiations, I think we had good role players there. We had Lexham Party, we had Maleki George, and we negotiated the principle. And the principle was about non-racialism. And people get confused about non-racialism and multiracialism. Multiracialism, when you identify people in boxes, in colors, colored Indians, so on, so on, so on. We pushing the ideal and the ideas that were pushed was a non-racial position, where we saw people united in their diversity. We saw people. We didn't see color. And that was the concept we had to sell. And most times the negotiation was more about multiracial, and multiracial is not what we fought. What we fought for in this country. We fought for non-racialism. And still today, we have people misunderstanding that. When we hear people talk in parliament, people talk on television, we talk about people in boxes. And the principle that everybody fought for, the ANC, the non-racial sports movement, the South African Rugby, was for non-racialism, where we see people as people. We don't see them by the color of their skin. And those are the principles that you had to drive home at those meetings. We had Silas Kununu, Lexham Party, all lawyers. I remember going to the NSC meetings where these guys would get up and debate about what's going to happen the day we achieve the freedom. And we achieved the freedom. And they were instrumental in crafting the principles of the freedom that the sports movement went into. The principles we're doing now, they were the crafters of that. We had strong administrators in sport, and rugby in particular. Rugby, the administrators came with rugby, either went to government or they took on top positions. You look at the Director General at the time, and Toby Tsunjasha was the Secretary General of the NSC, but also Secretary of Border Rugby. Martin Jonama was involved in Eastern Cape. A lot of strong administrators came out of rugby. And rugby used to have vigorous debates, and I mean vigorous debates about principles. And unfortunately, I think some of those principles are falling by the wayside when people, the principles they fought for, it's gone by the wayside. They forgot what we actually fought for. And if we stick to those principles, the principle of non-racialism, we won't have all these racial incidents we have in the country currently.
And we're speaking about principles, and with me going back and doing my research, in November 1985, there was an incident at a SARU meeting where Mr. Patel represented the SARU board, and then Dr. Dani Craven represented his board. And at the time, there were 3 key SARU members that resigned. And Mr. Patel refused to sit in this meeting because he stood by his word that it's not a one-man show. Brian or Mark, would you like to give more insight into some of those principles that he stood by and how that unfolded?
Yeah, I think just that incident there. There was also another incident, where South African Rugby had to apply for a permit to play at the Denkeke Stadium in Zweden. But Ebrahim Patel stated unambiguously that SARU would never apply for a permit to play against our compatriots, our own people. And that weekend's fixtures in 1985 was called off. And I can tell you, you know, Patel was a strong and fearless voice against injustices and the humiliation that we had to encounter, which the powers that were treated us with. I remember how they would come and arrest Bo Jardine, you know, for using rugby to further the political ideals, and because that was the only place where these things could happen. And the one thing that Patel never did, I remember that night, and Mark will recall that, where we were all phoned by Patel and said, Bill has just been arrested, you know, and you would never sit back and say, this is just what is happening. He did something practical about the situation. You know, he wouldn't, in spite of the threats, the danger and the persecution against his person and many others, and I've mentioned, you know, in our experience, we were told, guys, we've got to be very careful, we've got to lay low and so on, but that didn't deter us. And we had a strong leader. You know, we had a leader that really, for many years, became the thorn in the flesh of the apartheid regime, and probably the late Dani Craven's most terrible nightmare. That was Ebrahim Patel. So his principles and his tenacity to make sure that we will not, you know, at one stage, that very same Bill Jardine Stadium, we were told, because remember those stadiums belonged to the municipalities of your local authorities. And there were threats that they were going to take away the Longdale Stadium from us. And Patel says, whatever is there, we will burn it to the ground, but they're not going to take it away from us. That was Ebrahim Patel, you know, not scared of what might happen going forward, but also making sure that we continue to play the rugby. Mark, I don't know if you want to add something more on that.
No, I think you said it all there, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, gentlemen, moving forward now, unity came about, and then 1992, unity was formed, and now South Africa raised the bid to host the Rugby World Cup in 1995. Mark, in hosting the World Cup in South Africa, we've come from an exodus in rugby as a whole. Bringing the World Cup to South Africa, what was that process like, and what did it mean to administrators at the time? Because I know it clearly meant a lot to rugby supporters in South Africa, but from an administrative perspective, how was this curated so that it can unite the country?
I think, you know, it unfolded over time. Actually, during the World Cup, what you could actually see the power of sport. How people came together, and there's one thing in this country, when our people come together, is when we play sport. Nothing else can unite people like sport, and particularly rugby. People like rugby, and the people follow rugby in this country. And when the rugby community got together and we had a united rugby union, you could see the results around the stadium and when the games were on, in the streets. You know, people backed us hosting this the first big rugby tournament in the country. And people came together. And rugby in particular played a major role of where we are today as a nation. It just showed how can we do things when we work together, what we can achieve. And the result of that tournament is a testament to how sport unites this country. It started there with Madiba and Francois Pina. But still today, we can still use sport to unite our country. sport is a catalyst for social cohesion in this country. And that was the start in
Got a
95.
problem with Brian's line there. Sorry. Okay, you can continue, Mark. You can continue. I think we just lost Brian there.
Okay, if you can actually see where we are today. It was the sport that brought people together. We had the elections in '94, but it was that 1995 Rugby World Cup that galvanized this newly found unity and newly found New South Africa. That was the starting point of the New South Africa. '94, the voting was all fun, but when we really saw what South Africa can do when we come together was that '95 World Cup. The support the team received from the nation, from all walks of life. Even when we won the World Cup, you looked at the streets, how people were together. And sport brings people together, and that was so important, bringing that event to our country. And whenever we do bring big events over the sport, regardless of what party you belong to, regardless of what domination you belong to, people come together. And sport is the true vehicle for social cohesion in this country. And our country uses that to unite us. And rugby was the catalyst for that in 1995.
And I mean, again, it was the same situation in 2019 with everything happening. Sport again united the country. Brian, do we have you on the line still? It looks like we've just lost Brian. But okay, moving forward. And I mean, the World Cup was brought to South Africa, Mark, and we all know the influence that Mr. Patel had on rugby. But now going forward, and how do us as rugby lovers and myself as a rugby administrator and a sports broadcaster, how do we keep the legacy of Ebrahim Patel flying high and always on a pedestal in the rugby communities in South Africa?
I think one of the things we need to do, and I don't see it happening now, is to instill those principles in the new administrators coming through. In the country now, in sport generally, we have very few administrators that are capable of coming through. And because we don't have those principles, the old non-racial sports movement gave us on a point of order. Every meeting, before meeting, there was a training session and teaching the principles about running being a treasure and all the little things. In the old days, before a SACOS meeting, there was a course. Before a rugby meeting, there was a course. And these leaders instilled all these principles, and we need to do that again, because we can see around the countryside there are very few people coming through, and it's a concern. I raised the concern in rugby. Who's the next president? We need to already have 2 or 3 people lining up to take over. We need young people. We need to bring the young people up closer to things, and that's why we bring in players onto our boards. We had John Smith serving on our board, but we need to bring players. We got Shamangi serving on the Pedro Jackson Fund. We had on the events company that South African Rugby has, we had Pat Lambie. But we need to bring the guys closer. We need to bring them into this table. And I know a lot of players, all they want to do is play. I was in that position as well. But it's life after that, and you see the world differently once you get into administration. I was a very naughty player, and I had to be disciplined at times. But when I got into administration, I started seeing things differently. I started understanding the values that sports people should be pushing out to its members, and what principles we should be. When you play, you just want to play. All you want to do is get on the practice field and go play on the weekend and go home. You couldn't care how all the other magic happens. And there are a lot of people who sacrificed lots of their time for sport. And there's still lots of people sacrificing their time for sport. So clubs all around the country play a very important role. Clubs, schools, and universities is the success, is the key for South African rugby success. Without them, we're nothing.
That's so true. And it looks like we've got Brian van Rooyen on the line again. Mr. van Rooyen, the question I posed to Mark before you lost the line was, how do we uphold and how do we take the legacy and keep the flag of Ebrahim Patel flying high in South African rugby now? Is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I think the fundamental thing has been that ethos of community involvement. And here I need to make a passionate plea to Mark, because Mark's the current sitting president, that I just heard him saying that we need to focus on club rugby, because without your clubs, there is no rugby. And I want us to take that as a basis to remember Ebrahim Patel, because he was so passionate about having club rugby very strong. And that is what the ethos of SARU Rugby was. It had a strong club base. And I know SA Rugby is doing a lot within club rugby. I'm not oblivious to the fact that is happening, but we should be make our focus a little bit more away. And I have to choose my words very carefully, but equally I'm not scared of saying what I want to say, in that yes, it has become a professional sport, and yes, it is about money, and it is because that's where the funding comes from. But let us not forget that the future of rugby in this country is going to play out from a club perspective, and let us take the Ebrahim Patel legacy. We know we've got the Craven Week, and we've got at one stage we had the Grand Como Week. Let us get something, Mark, think about it. And I know there's many other people that might have ideas that send it to you on a regular basis. But, I always take the advantage when I've got the leader of the organization. I can push a little bit to the side and say, let's do a club. I know we've got the club competitions that's going, but let's strengthen that in honor of Ebrahim Patel.
So we do currently have the Gold Cup that will be taking place later this year again, and I mean that's a nice thing that you said there, Brian, to do something in honor and legacy. And it's just a pity we don't have Derek on the line now, who currently sits on the Chairman's Council of the Golden Lions Rugby Union, and could we look at things like having a stand at Emirates Airline Park called the Ebrahim Patel stand, the grandstand? You know what I'm trying to say? It's things like that we need to do, because we've got the likes of the Craven Week, named after Daddy Craven. We've got the Grand Como Week, and we've got the Bill Jardine Stadium as well that holds the legacy of Bill Jardine. So my question that I pose to the public now is, where do we take the legacy going forward? And we'd be open to suggestions and like it. And I mean, Mark, I put my hand up if you want to commercialize club rugby. I'm 100% in there with you, and we can make it a competition that could work.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with you guys. But let me just put one point out there, and just like I've asked and I've posed this sort of proposal to Mark, that I know he will take it up at SA Rugby level, because that's just the way he is. I mean, let me just give a classical example. And you were asking about a place at Emirates Airline Park. Ebrahim Patel, Ryan van Rooyen, Mark Alexander, all are 3 SARU presidents, came from the Transvaal, from our Transvaal. I know our guys at the Bill Jardine Stadium has done it from our perspective. I hope, not for my sake or for Mark's sake, but for Patel's sake, they will do just that. That's the challenge that I want to give to the Golden Lions Rugby Union.
And I think it's a valid challenge, and that's one that needs to be tabled and noted. Mark, is there anything
I
you'd
think
like
I want
to say
to
before
come in
we?
here.
Yeah,
I hear
sure.
what Brian's saying, and I think we need to find a way to honor Mr. Patel properly. But when you talk club rugby, and I think this just for understanding of how rugby operates, 85% of our revenue is generated by playing international rugby, be it in the URC or the Super Rugby as you know it, or the Springboks. And the balance is done by the top 4 franchises, the 7s, and hosting a couple of tests that makes up our revenue stream. Government's contribution to SARU is 0.03 for women's rugby.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Springboks don't play and when the URC doesn't play, we don't. You can already see what we cut out of our budget. And the last 2020 and 2021, has been a very tough time for us. You know, when I took over, we were technically bankrupt, and we turned the corner, and we 2018, 2019, we were cash flush, and we were hoping to capitalize in 2020 when we came back from the Rugby World Cup, and then COVID came. In the first year, we played no international rugby. And what I just said about how we make up our money, you can understand where that put our coffers. In the second year, we played some international rugby. So whatever we do, we fund from the Springboks all the way down to the club rugby, to school rugby. It gets funded out of the pot. Nobody funds that. Nobody gives us money for club rugby. Nobody gives us money for development. Nobody gives us money for transformation. That system we use and we cross-subsidize all the way down. Now, I hear about the club rugby, Brian, and I agree with you, but club rugby is a competency of the provincial rugby unions. And they need to get their hands dirty. You know, when you get elected to the board, you're not there to carry the blazer. You need to go and knock on the doors and open doors and get sponsorship. It cannot be a hand down on always. You need to go and raise that money yourself. And that's where the confusion comes in. You know, our road is a national competency. Province, we've got the 4 officials, and they have to generate in the clubs. And clubs is the bedrock of rugby. If unions don't allow clubs to die, then rugby will die. School rugby, university rugby, club rugby are the people who do the hard work of the foundation for players. When they go to step up to provincial rugby and to national rugby, they're only doing the finer polishing. So the hard work is actually done at that club level, at the school level, at that university level. So the provinces must do more. They must
definitely.
And stuff, but they must do more.
Yeah.
It's not only about your franchise team, it's about the community game as well.
I agree totally with what you're saying. But remember, as the custodians of rugby, you know, we say that, yes, it is the responsibility of the provincial unions to make sure that they go down and do the club rugby. But you see, it's also the provincial unions that are benefiting from the resources that's coming in from the URC and from the Springboks and so on. And therefore, I'm saying that from a club perspective, at a policy, from a policy perspective at SA Rugby, to enforce those guys and tell them this is what needs to happen. I know it's difficult. I know a lot of people have pulled their sponsorships and so on. For us, yes, I understand, been there, have experienced it. So I know exactly what you mean when you say where the resources coming from. I was very fortunate. I did not have a 2-year COVID period. You know?
I think, gentlemen, can I just step in there quickly for a second? I think we shouldn't lose track of it. I mean, there's all valid points that were noted now. But I mean, let's not lose track of the purpose of why we had this discussion tonight and going forward.
Yes,
and you know, Mark, I mean, going forward now, we're going to keep the legacy of Ebrahim Patel. And, gentlemen, if there's any last, Brian, if there's any last words that you'd like to pass on and give inspiration and motivation to the next generation on what we can do as administrators, broadcasters, and rugby lovers to, keep that spirit and keep those ethos of Ebrahim Patel in us and flying high. Is there any words that you have to say in
I
closing?
think just to conclude, from my side, he's never done it for himself. He's done it to leave a legacy. We must take that legacy. It is up to us to take that baton. I've never seen so a united front with the passing of Ebrahim Patel from all spheres, from rugby loving people, from administrators, from communities. We want to, we will make sure that his legacy will live on, so that those that come after him will benefit from what he has put in there. And I want to thank everybody, SARU Rugby. I don't know if I want to mention some of the guys that have helped from the broadcasters and everybody that has assisted during this time. And the least we can do is to honor Ebrahim Patel's name.
Thank you so much, Brian. And from yourself, Mark, before we do end off this beautiful tribute to the late Ebrahim Patel.
We have a lot of ex-players and stuff who if you feel left out, you need to be involved with your club. I'm still involved with my club. I'm still the president of Raiders.
I'll still see you there on a Saturday.
Because it starts there. You need to know where you come from. You need to contribute there. And there's so many people and so many ex-players. Come back and help your club. Because only you can make a difference in your club. It's not going to happen by magic. Club rugby is important, and lastly, just to say to Brian, every union gets an allocation for the amateur rugby, for the various components of amateur rugby, which should be complemented with the contribution from the unions. But my appeal to the public out there and to the ex-rugby players, go back and help your club. If your club dies, you to blame. Only we who come from the clubs must stay in the clubs, and we will make sure our clubs grow and become stronger. Because club rugby is the bedrock. My kids asked me the other day, wouldn't you like to have played for the Golden Lions now? I said no, because when we played in those days, we lived in homes, we slept on floors, we slept in churches. We drove by car. We never had new jerseys every week. While we're driving to play a game, Mr. Marston is sitting in the combi, sewing the jerseys, fixing the jerseys. So there were a lot of sacrifices, and who says we still can't do that? We can make things happen for our communities, for our children. But we all have to get our hands and go out there and make things happen. Let's revive our communities. And wherever we can help, and wherever I can help, I will help, But I think we all have to play our part.
Yeah.
What we also, I think most people think once unity came, bucket loads of money were given and to hand out. There's no bucket loads of money. We need to make things happen, and we need to make things happen for ourselves. And there are a lot of clubs, a lot of good clubs, gardens in Port Elizabeth, all over the country, where guys get out and they do the old things we used to do, cake sales and all the other stuff, to make sure the club plays on a Saturday. There's a team out in Utenek that does crowdfunding to fund the activities of the community rugby, the school rugby, and their own rugby.
And that's all ways of moving forward. Mr. Alexander, we are running out of time. Is there any final words from your side?
I will see what we can do to honor Mr. Patel's legacy. I need to find a tournament or something that we could actually now. I don't want to take away somebody else's name and cause a riot on my hands. To find a thing where we can really honor Mr. Patel's legacy. He was the pioneer of the newly found South African Rugby Union. Him and so many others. And we're thankful for them. We're thankful what they did for us and to get us to a place where we can hold hands with each other in united South African Rugby Union.
No, definitely. Well, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Van Rooyen, thanks so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it. I will be sharing this link with you guys for future reference to keep and obviously send around in the different groups. Well, it is now 7:45, and from myself, Zakir Dawood, we're going to go to a quick ad break. And from that, we're going to be back and we're going to be chatting all things community cricket. Thanks to Mr. Van Rooyen and Mr. Alexander for taking time out of the evening for this special tribute. We're going to go to a quick ad break. Don't turn your dials. Don't move. We will be back in just a bit.